Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God. Back with you with the next video in my series, reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Without further ado, returning to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn as read by Lord Naren White. When the place was packed full, the undertaker, he slid around in his black gloves with his softly soothing ways, putting on the last touches, and getting people and things all shipshape and comfortable, and making no more sound than a cat. He never spoke, he moved people around. He squeezed in late ones, he opened up passageways and done it with nods and signs with his hands. Then he took his place over against the wall. He was the softest, glidingest, stealthiest man I ever see, and there weren't no more smile to him than there is to a ham. They had borrowed a melodeon, a sick one, and when everything was ready, a young woman sat down and worked it, and it was pretty shrieky and colicky, and everybody joined in and sung. And Peter was the only one that had a good thing, according to my notion. Then the Reverend Hobson opened up slow and solemn, and begun to talk, and straight off the most outrageous row busted out in the cellar a body ever heard. It was only one dog, but he made a most powerful racket, and he kept it up right along. The parson he had to stand there over the coffin and wait. You couldn't hear yourself think. It was right down awkward, and nobody didn't seem to know what to do. But pretty soon they see that long-legged undertaker make a sign to the preacher as much as to say, "Don't you worry, just depend on me." Then he stooped down and begun to glide along the wall, just his shoulders showing over the people's heads. So he glided along, and the powwow and racket getting more and more outrageous all the time. And at last, when he had gone around two sides of the room, he disappears down cellar. Then in about 2 seconds we heard a whack, and the dog he finished up with the most amazing howl or two. And then everything was dead still, and the parson began his solemn talk where he left off. In a minute or two, here comes this undertaker's back, and shoulders gliding along the wall again. And so he glided and glided around three sides of the room, and then rose up, and shaded his mouth with his hands, and stretched his neck out towards the preacher over the people's heads, and says in a kind of coarse whisper, "He had a rat!" Then he drooped down and glided along the wall again to his place. You could see it was a great satisfaction to the people, because naturally they wanted to know. A little thing like that don't cost nothing, and it's just the little things that makes a man to be looked up to and liked. There weren't no popular man in town then that undertaker was. Well, the funeral sermon was very good, but pison long and tiresome. And then the king, he shoved in and got off some of his usual rubbish, and at last the job was through, and the undertaker begun to sneak up on the coffin with his screwdriver. I was in a sweat then, and watched him pretty keen, but he never meddled at all. Just slid the lid as soft as mush, and screwed it down tight and fast. So there I was. I didn't know whether the money was in there or not, so says I suppose somebody has hogged that bag on the sly. Now, how do I write whether to marry Jane or not? Suppose she dug him up and didn't find nothing. What would she think of me? Blame it, I says. I might get hunted up and jailed. I'd better lay low and keep dark, and not write at all. The thing's awful mixed now, trying to better it. I've worsened it 100 times, and I wish to goodness I'd just let it alone. Dad, fetch the whole business. They buried him, and we come back home, and I went to watching faces again. I couldn't help it, and I couldn't rest easy. But nothing come of it. The faces didn't tell me nothing. The king he visited around in the evening and sweetened everybody up, and made himself ever so friendly. And he give out the idea that his congregation over in England would be in a sweat about him, so he must hurry and settle up the estate right away, and leave for home. He was very sorry he was so pushed, and so was everybody. They wished he could stay longer, but they said they could see it be done. And of course him and William would take the girls home with them, and that pleased everybody too, because then the girls would be well fixed amongst their own relations. And it pleased the girls too, tickled them so they clean forgot they ever had trouble in the world, and told him to sell out as quick as he wanted to. They would be ready. Them poor things was that glad and happy it made my heart ache to see them getting fooled and lied to so. but I didn't see no safe way for me to chip in and change the general tune. Well, blamed if the king didn't build the house and the blacks at and all the property for auction straight off, sale 2 days after the funeral. But anybody could buy private beforehand if they wanted to. So the next day after the funeral, along about noontime, the girls' joy got the first jolt. A couple of black traders come along, and the king sold them the blacks reasonable for 3 days' drafts, and as they called it, and away they went, the two sons up to the river Memphis, and their mother down to the river Orleans. I thought them poor girls and them blacks would break their hearts for grief. They cried around each other and took on so it made me down sick to see it. The girls said they hadn't ever dreamed of seeing the family separated or sold away from the town. I can't ever get it out of my memory. The sight of them poor miserable girls and blacks hanging around each other's necks and crying. And I reckon I couldn't have stood it at all, but would have had to bust out and tell on our gang if I hadn't knowed the sale warn't no account and the blacks would be back home in a week or two. The thing made a big stir in the town, too, and a good many come out flat-footed and said it was scandalous to separate the mother and the children that way. It injured the fraud some, but the old fool he bulled right along, spite of all the Duke could say or do, and I tell you the Duke was powerful uneasy. Next day was auction day. About broad day in the morning, the king and the duke come up in the garret and woke me up, and I see by their look that there was trouble. The king says, "Was you in my room the night before last?" "No, your majesty." Which was the way I always called him. Which was the way I always called him, and nobody but our gang weren't around. "Was you in there yesterday or last night?" "No, your majesty." "Honor bright, now, no lies." "Honor bright, your majesty. I'm telling you the truth. I ain't been near your room since Miss Mary Jane took you and the Duke and showed it to you." The Duke says, "Have you seen anybody else go in there?" "No, your grace, not as I remember, I believe." "Stop and think." I studied a while and see my chances. Then I says, "Well, I see the blacks go in there several times." Both of them gave a little jump and looked like they hadn't ever expected it. And they like they had. Then the Duke says, "What, all of them?" "No, leastways not all at once. That is, I don't think I ever see them all come out at once, but just one time." "Hello, when was that?" "It was the day we had the funeral. In the morning. I weren't early because I overslept. I was just starting down the ladder and I see them." "Well, go on. What did they do? How did they act?" "They didn't do nothing. And they didn't act anyway much. As far as I see, they tiptoed away, so I seen easy enough that they'd shoved it in there to do up your majesty's room, or something s'posin' you was up, and found you weren't up. And so they was hoping to slide out of the way trouble without waking you up, if they hadn't already waked you up." "Great guns, this is a go," says the king, and both of them looked pretty sick and tolerable silly. They stood there thinking and scratching their heads a minute, and the Duke, he bust into a kind of a little raspy chuckle and says, "It does beat all how neat the blacks played their hand. They let on to be sorry they was going out of this region, and I believed they was sorry, and so did you, and so did everybody. Don't ever tell me any more that a black ain't got any histrionic talent. Why, the way they played that thing, it would fool anybody. In my opinion, there's a fortune in them. If I had a capital and a theater, I wouldn't want a better layout than that. And here we've gone and sold 'em for a song. Yes, and ain't privileged to sing the song yet. Say, where is that song, that draft?" "In the bank for to be collected. Where would it be?" "Well, that's all right then, thank goodness," says I, kind of timid-like. "Is something gone wrong?" The king whirls on me and rips out, "None of your business! You keep your head sheet and mind your own affairs if you got any. Long as you're in this town, don't you forget that, you hear?" Then he says to the Duke, We got to just swaller it and say nothing. Mum's the word for us." As they was starting down the ladder, the Duke, he chuckles again and says, "Quick sales and small profits. It's a good business, yes." The king snarls around on him and says, and we'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light to be with you all. Take care, and thanks again.